Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about The Fires of Heaven, the fifth Wheel of Time book. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review, and I already know for a fact people are going to think I hated this book based on how I'll talk about some parts of it, but let me just stress that is not the case. I love this series. I did not dislike this book. I think this is a good book. I wouldn't really go much further than that. I think this is a very good book on paper, but the enjoyment factor just wasn't really there for me. I see this as a book of necessity, really. After the events of The Shadow Rising, the scope of the world has increased immensely, and a lot of seeds were sowed during this book. A lot of things were moved into position for the plot going forward, and basically, the rest of the Emmons Fielders needed to catch up to Rand and Perrin, and they each needed to kind of step into their own, so to speak. I only really had two main issues with this book and some smaller annoyances, but the two issues were just completely detrimental to my enjoyment of the book. The first one was repetition. This book was way too repetitive. Jordan has always had a repetitive writing style, but in previous books, repetition, it felt like it either helped with my immersion in the world, helped me better picture the world, or helped me better understand the world and the characters within it. That was not the case in this book. The repetition in this was just completely redundant, it felt like. And I'll give some examples of this repetitiveness later when I talk about the second issue with this book for me, which is Nynaeve Almira. Nynaeve in this is simply horrid. She is a black hole of negativity and hypocrisy that just completely sucked my enjoyment out of the first three quarters of this book. And you know those people in real life who are like just completely miserable, and if you stay around them for too long, eventually you will also become miserable. Nynaeve is that in this, but 10 times worse. She brought so much negativity into this that it just rubbed off on me, and it was affecting me even when I wasn't even reading her chapters. I just found myself not enjoying this book as like an after effect of spending time with Nynaeve. I felt like there was one main cause for my issues with this book, and that was the plot. For me, this is by far the most lackluster and underwhelming plot of the first 5 books in the series. And I'm not considering this a con of the book, don't get me wrong, because for me, when this is the case, the characters can and need to take the spotlight. And that is the case with this book. The characters do take the spotlight. This is a much more character-focused story than the previous 4 books. However, Nynaeve takes the spotlight in the worst possible way. She is an abrasive and just suffocating POV to read from, and I genuinely dreaded finishing a chapter from Rand's or Swan's arcs and seeing Nynaeve's name at the start of the next page. I want to talk about this book in order of arc appearance, so I'm going to talk about Nynaeve a bit later on in the review. I'll keep my thoughts on her for then. I'll probably have to split this review into 2 like I've done for The Shadow Rising, but let me know in the comments if you would just prefer me to make one really long 50-ish minute video for the longer books in the series, or if you don't mind me splitting them into 2 like I have been doing. So getting back into it. So because the plot of this was a lot weaker for me, it felt like this was the first book in the series where I felt like I was genuinely just watching people go from point A to point B, and all the previous books have had plotlines structured like this, but this is the only book so far where I felt like there was not anything intriguing to mask the fact for me. There were way too many moments in the first 3 quarters of this book where I actually felt like nothing happened. There was no need for this book to be as long as it was. There could have easily been like 100 or 2 pages less, and the book would have been far better for it. I feel like this book probably would have been 100 pages less if Jordan just fucking rubbed one out each day before starting writing this. Sorry for being vulgar, but seriously, the amount of unnecessary mentions of how seductively clothes cling to people's bodies, how sheer dresses were, how low cut the necklines of dresses were, how often women had to fold their arms beneath their breasts, or just the general unnecessary amount of mentions of bosoms in this. It was just ridiculous, and it added nothing to the story. Normally I defend the way Jordan is so descriptive of people's clothings in this series, but in this it was genuinely needless and added nothing to the world building besides when he was talking about how the manly women lead men on. Now let's get into the story. The prologue in this features all the antagonists. We meet Elida in the White Tower as the Amerlin, and we see her trying to keep all the Aes Sedai in check, and we see her insecurity about the Aes Sedai not showing her the same reverence and respect they showed Swan. Now, I completely misunderstood Elida's character during The Dragon Reborn. She's just completely focused on her power and her position, and the well-being of the world is kind of secondary to that for her. I thought there was more to her than that, but I guess I was wrong. But I feel like at least she was a bit subtly manipulated by Alviarin, at least it seems like, because she was revealed later on in the book to be a dark friend herself. We also meet Padan Fane. He's in the White Tower as well, and he kind of takes the approach with everyone that Moiraine takes with Rand. He surrenders to them so that they are in turn easier to manipulate and control. Later on in the book, he takes back the dagger from Shadar Logoth. So I believe that now he's back to being Mordeth, however you pronounce that, but Mordeth mixed with Padan Fane's consciousness. So I'm excited to see where that'll lead. Maybe he's going to be one of those, what are they called? The Dreadlords that have been talked about. I don't know, to be honest. We also meet the Forsaken in the prologue, but I'll talk about them later on in the review in turn. So getting into the main story now, apologies in advance if I didn't pick up on as much as usual in this book. This book felt to me like it was a bunch of getting people ready to continue in the broader scope of the world that the Shadow Rising set up and just getting everything into position for the plot to move forward. And honestly, I just didn't have my head fully in this when I was reading primarily Nynaeve's POVs for the day. So in the main story, we first meet up with Min, Swan, and Leanne. They are being held for trial in Core Springs after an altercation led to them causing a barn to burn down. I think that's what happened. So they meet Gareth Bryn because he is the Lord of Core Springs and he is the judge for their trial. And after being sentenced to serve at Gareth's Manor, they each swear the most severe oath possible, which they immediately break, of course, after being freed by Logain from captivity. So they escape, and this sets them and Gareth Bryn on their arcs for the book. Gonna start off with a take that I'm sure is not controversial in the slightest. Min in this sucks. By this point in the story, she has been reduced as a character to somebody who is just in love with Rand. That is all there is to her. She does nothing in this book that I can remember besides think about being back with Rand, cursing Rand, complain about Swan, argue with Swan, and have viewings. That's all she does in this book, unless I'm forgetting something. And what made me enjoy Min in previous books was that she was different, she was unique, she had her own unique personality and characteristics, but she wasn't just the I'm not like other girls archetype. And now by this point in the story, she has changed completely. Originally, she was different. She embraced her difference and didn't want to change. But now she is no longer the same person. Her hair is longer. She's wearing dresses. She spends all her time fretting over a man. And she spends all her time having catfights with Leanne and Swan. And don't get me wrong, it's not like the dresses and the longer hair is what annoys me. If she likes them, she likes them. I don't care. But it just feels like this is all for Rand and not for her own contentment. And I feel like this is like just a complete disservice to her character or what she was previously. Like, it's just pointless as well because Rand is already in love with her without any knowledge of how she has become or what even her state is. Leanne in this gets more fleshed out. She and Swan are dealing with the after effects of being stilled, and for her, revenge and working back towards positions of power are not enough to fill that void. So she decides to embrace her Damani heritage and starts manipulating men with suggestive behavior and adopting a more sultry nature. I thought that was good for her, and I did enjoy watching her pull herself out of that pit. But honestly, I found it pretty hard to root for any of the women involved in either of the female trios in this book. The only one I could really root for was Swan. I'm indifferent towards Swan in this, but I can sympathize with her situation. Like Leanne, she has been stilled and is dealing with the after effects, and she has to learn how to fill the void left behind by the One Power. She is trying to resume her role as a player in the grander games of the world, and she is determined to make Elida pay for what she did to her and Leanne during the coup. Her main struggles in this book is accepting that she isn't what she once was and that people are not going to treat her as if she is either. She has to accept her newfound lack of authority, and she has to learn how to show diffidence. For me, there were two main formative moments in this book for Swan, the first being her encounter with Mistress Tharn in Lugard, and the second being her arrival at Salidar. Her experience with Mistress Tharn was the first time Swan has ever seen somebody meet her commanding aura with outright rudeness and dismissal. Up until that moment, her disagreements have only been with really Min, Leanne, and Logain, but those disagreements have essentially just been catty interactions, and she has overpowered each of them pretty easily. So for me, this was kind of the main moment that really drove home for Swan that she is no longer the Amerlin. Then we have the meeting with Shiraim and the other Aes Sedai at Salidar. They initially treat her as if she was never even Aes Sedai and try to extract all the information she has from her, and I found it really admirable how she dealt with that situation. She, same as same as Moiraine and Padan Fane, she submits in order to control, and I really enjoyed watching her hatch that plan off there, playing off of Leanne with this kind of good cop, bad cop kind of approach with the other Aes Sedai, and I just really enjoyed watching Swan's tenacity and perseverance. So while I'm not a fan of her yet, I'm definitely getting there. She showed really good growth. And there's also this relationship she has been developing with Gareth Bryn. She has feelings for him now that she has not acknowledged. I don't really mind the pairing. It's kind of typical Wheel of Time fashion, but I don't understand the hard-on for doing stuff off-screen in this book. We have Matt killing Couladin, that's off-screen. We have this development with Gareth Bryn and Swan off-screen. The majority of the Battle of Cairhien is off-screen. And we have Moiraine and Lanfear go through the ter'angreal and they die off-screen. Now, sorry if off-screen is not the proper term here for this. I'm new to books. I guess off-page, I don't know. Logain doesn't really do much in this. At the start of the book, he frees the women when they're being transported, but then by the end of the book, he is back to being basically the dregs of a man. But Min still sees the aura of power and glory over his head, so I guess he's going to be healed somehow, maybe by Nynaeve, but my guess would be that he goes to Caemlyn with Rand, and whenever Rand discovers how to reverse the taint on Saidin and Gentling, then we will see the full return of Logain, the false dragon. If I was to make any guesses on how Gentling is going to be reversed, there was a lot of mentions of the linking ability in this book, so I'm guessing linking has something to do with reversing Gentling somehow. Gareth Bryn, he was, along with Swan, the highlight of this arc for me. I really enjoyed all of his chapters, even though they were few in number. He is dealing with the lingering feelings he has for Margaiz, and he has to move past them, and I thought how Jordan done that was fantastic. I really enjoyed what chapter was it? The old pipe chapter, I can't remember what number it was, but we see Gareth take out this old pipe he has, which is shaped into the shape of a wild bull with the rose crown over it to symbolize the Bryn's family service to the Queen. And he says that he needs to get a new one because this one is old, and I just thought that was a really good passage. Then later on in the book, Gareth does one of the most impressive things in the whole book and shows how capable a man he is. He finds himself in a room full of Aes Sedai who are aiming to push him into a position to serve them, and he absolutely finesses it. He shells out term after term and pieces together really quickly the position the Aes Sedai are in and uses that as leverage to make sure all his demands are met. I thought that was amazing. I think that's all for this arc with all of them. Min saw Shirayim at one point during the Shadow Rising with her viewing. She saw Shirayim with a face that was battered and bruised, so I guess at some point hard times are coming to Salidar. Moving on to Rand. Rand's arc as always was great, really loved it. We first meet him in Rhuidean, where he's having proper meetings now with the other clan chiefs as Cara Karn, and we see some of his lessons with Asmodean. Rand in this book reminded me a lot of something Perrin said during The Dragon Reborn. At the start of that book, when we first met Perrin, he had this line about the Shianarans, and he basically said that they have been through their own metaphorical forge, which has hardened them into the soldiers that they are. And for me, that is just Rand completely in this book. The events of the past 4 books in the series so far have hardened him to the point where he is able to shoulder his responsibility as the Dragon Reborn, as well as carry out his duties as a leader. Being that leader and the Dragon Reborn is the two things he struggles with throughout this book, I would say, with a pretty hard emphasis on hardness itself. And we see this pile on continuously throughout the book. Like, there's these events like dealing with the clan chiefs, being Cara Karn, being determined to deal with Couladin however he needs to, his willingness to use his friends from Emond's Field as he sees fit, and just interacting with Asmodean in general. All of these has reinforced that ideal of hardness. And if I had to pick the main things that have driven him towards it, I would say it's his trip to Seanchan, Moiraine's death, and the Maidens. The trip to Seanchan was a not-so-gentle reminder that regardless of what Rand is currently occupied with, he has enemies everywhere, and he cannot afford to treat any of them easily or else he'll never make it to Shai Ol Ghul. Moiraine's death showed him that inaction is not an option. He refused to kill one woman and ended up getting her and another killed as a result. I really hope he doesn't make that mistake again. I don't think he will. What's done is done, but I'm sure Moiraine's death will affect him going forward. And then we have the Maidens. Rand the Dragon Reborn compromising on the ideals of Rand the Farm Boy was a common occurrence throughout this book. The Maidens, as well as the death of Moiraine, showed him that sometimes the death of women and those he cares for cannot be avoided, and Should those he cares for wish to put themselves in harm's way of their own volition, he doesn't really have the right to deny them of that choice. And Aviendha and Egwene helped out in that regard as well with that realization. I guess you could also say Rand worked on his hardness in Seanchan with Aviendha in another kind of way, but that was pretty meh. I cared more about the igloo, if I'm being honest. Rand and Aviendha are a lot closer in this book. They're basically a couple now, except neither of them are aware of the fact. I don't really have much else to say for Aviendha. She's okay. I need more POVs from her to form more of an opinion of her. So Moiraine and Lanfear are dead now. Yeah, sorry. Unpopular opinion, don't really care. Moiraine's death was not a surprise in the slightest. It was foreshadowed since The Great Hunt, and even if it wasn't, there were constant death flags in this book, which honestly started to annoy me. You don't need to say 5 times per POV that you don't have much time left and that you won't be with Rand forever. You're just making it too obvious, in my opinion. All that was really needed was little infrequent subtle hints, like her saying she wished she could see how the Aiel would turn out under Rand, or her giving Rand Tom's letter as well as his own. I only really started to like Moiraine in this book. We see just how exasperated she is now that all the Emond's Fielders have started to defy her, and this leads to her pledge of obedience to Rand in an attempt to surrender to him, to control him like Salidar. And I really enjoyed seeing how she has developed this kind of genuine fondness for the Emond's Fielders throughout the journey. She ultimately still just wants to save the world, but she does care about Rand now, and seemingly Mat as well. She does not just care about the Dragon Reborn, and she genuinely wants Rand to do well. That being said, yes, I did start to like her in this, but I honestly don't really care that she is dead. The final letter she left for Rand, that was a tough read, I'll say. A little bit of a gut-wrencher. So she revealed that she knew she was going to die since Rhuidean, and that it was a fate she had chosen because, given the choice himself, Rand would have chosen to leave with Lanfear and go to the Shadow instead of cause Moiraine harm. She revealed that she knew who Asmodean was the whole time. Of course, we already knew that because we saw her using her blue crystal on her forehead that she uses to overhear conversations. And she told Rand to be wary of Varen. I don't know if she's alluding to Varen being Black Aja. I think she is. I said this in the last video, but I don't know if she said that for that reason or if she's just aware that Rand and Varen are familiar with one another. So yeah, just R.I.P. Moiraine, I guess. That final "he will do well" did hurt a little bit. Lanfear is also dead now. I did like Lanfear and I will miss her plotting, but again, I just cannot bring myself to care that she's dead. My interest in her was in her potential as an antagonist and her long-term goals, and to go out the way she did was just completely unimpressive to me, really. She just gets crazy over Aviendha and gets herself killed. I guess she really was just a yandere the whole time. I only said that as a joke in the last video, but I guess that's all she is. I don't really buy that the both of them are dead. I've never seen 2 characters of such importance just both die off screen like that. I would guess one of them is alive, and if I had to choose, it would be Moiraine because that's the more impactful return. It's not like they went into oblivion either. I don't think. I mean, they went through the Terangrial to the realm of the Elfin and the Ilfin, did they not? Unless I'm mistaken on the function of that Terangrial. Poor Lan, man. I felt so bad for him when he was leaving Cairhien to meet his new Aes Sedai. I am guessing the new Aes Sedai is Myrelle, the one that's on the council in Salidar with Sharaim, because I mentioned already how Moiraine's death was already foreshadowed since The Great Hunt. In The Great Hunt, there was a part where Lan and Moiraine, they visit these 2 recluse Aes Sedai. I cannot remember their names. I think they were Brown Aja, but they were more focused on their research in some random village. Moiraine and Lan have this conversation about Lan's loyalties or something like that, and she tells him that she has compelled him to go to an Aes Sedai called Myrelle when she dies. I went on a tangent there, but I kind of needed to address the deaths. But getting back to Rand is also dealing with loose Terran's consciousness seeping into his own during this book. We see him more and more think about Ilyena, and similarly to Mat, we see that he's starting to obtain information from his past lives, like the information about the Forsaken and the One Power. And I really enjoyed how this instability in Rand seemed to be the counterpart to his hardness, because that is the path that Rand is going down in my eyes. He is more focused on getting hard, and that came out completely wrong. He's focused more and more on being hard, and yes, he is achieving it, but not in the right way, in my opinion. He may be hardened, but he is brittle, and I feel like that will lead to his eventual downfall. He is not dealing with his weaknesses, he's ignoring them. He's filling his head with duty over and over again, and I feel like he's just going to wear himself out at some point. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Rand and Asmodean in this. You could never really tell what side Asmodean was on. And then he dies! He's killed in Camelin. Like, what? That was a surprising death. That one completely caught me off guard. Did not expect that at all. I'm kind of stumped on who this could be. I'm guessing it's just the last Forsaken we haven't been introduced to yet. I don't know if you would call this cheating. I personally wouldn't because it's in the books, but I went to the glossary to check how to pronounce Shemaraj, and all of the Forsaken names were listed in the same spot. Yes, all of them, including the last one, who is called Messaana. So, I don't know who this is. If they're in the glossary, I presume they've showed up, but I have no idea who that could have been. Are they somebody we know under an alias, or have they changed their appearance like Forsaken have been shown to do, or did they just use a gateway to show up in Camelin? Again, don't know if you'd call this cheating. Because this was in the glossary, I checked the glossaries of the other books, and they are only mentioned in the glossary for the Shadow Rising besides the Fires of Heaven. So I'm guessing they showed up in the Shadow Rising, and I'm guessing it's the person that actually tortured Sarah, because there's nobody I can remember from the Shadow Rising being introduced who I would potentially peg as Messaana in disguise. Battle of Korean was good too. I took a break from this book to watch some spoiler-free reviews on YouTube because, as I was saying, I went to watch some spoiler-free reviews because Nynaeve was absolutely doing my head in, and I could not fathom enjoying this more than The Shadow Rising. If you are one of the people who enjoy this more than The Shadow Rising, please let me know in the comments how, because I'm genuinely curious. Some of the people said that the Battle of Korean was a highlight for the book, so I was expecting an epic battle. That was not what I got. It was more a game of battleship from Rand and the two women. I'm not complaining about that, don't get me wrong, I don't think that was bad. I think the battle was very good for what it was. We got to see Rand really push himself with the one power, and we got a glimpse of what can happen when he pushes himself past the point of reason, and we got that amazing math content. What is there to complain about there? It feels like it was foreshadowed pretty subtly here that Rand is going to still himself, or at least blind himself to some capacity, because there's a line Rand has in this where he says something like, the light burned me blind, and that seemed like it was a bit of foreshadowing there, because in the last book, I think it was, Perrin had this wolf dream where he sees Rand in the rags and the blindfold. I already talked about it in the last video, but anyways, I think that line might have been a bit of foreshadowing there. The ending was great. Finally, a one-power battle that I can actually enjoy. All the one-power battles up to this point have just felt like people throwing shit at each other without knowing how, and somehow that's meant to appeal to me and look cool. Was not vibing with them at all. This final battle was really good because we got to see Rand struggle with Lews Therin's consciousness throughout, and we also got the culmination of Nynaeve's character development. We got to see her recover her bravery, and she's no longer just progressing with this foolish pride that she used to have. She is fully aware of the dangers of her situation, but she is determined to do the best that she can to help. I also loved the foreshadowing of Rand being the one to end up in the throne in Camelin. We had numerous mentions throughout that Camelin will never have a man sitting in his throne. It was said so many times, and the whole time I thought it was in reference to Ravin, but no, it was Rand. And we even had that vision from Egwene where she saw Rand sitting in somebody's throne, and she noted how she felt that the woman whose chair it was would have been murderously angry at finding out her chair had been taken, and it didn't even click to me in my head that that was Morghese until the end of the book. Matt in this is great, as always. The three guys from Emond's Fields are my three favourite characters by far. I love them so much. It is almost shameful how much better the main male trio is in this than the main female trio. Probably going to start some arguments saying something like that, but Matt in this has to accept his position in the pattern and the inevitability associated with being ta'veren. He basically has to reluctantly accept that there is no point in running anymore, although I'm sure he'll never stop complaining about it. He doesn't really get much page time. It's definitely a case of quality over quantity. For most of the book, he's pretty much repeating himself from previous books, saying that he wants to get as far away from Rand and Aes Sedai and the likes as possible. He also meets the maiden, Melindra. Not gonna lie to you, Melindra being a dark friend was not a surprise at all. She was the first person that came to mind when Kadir said there were Aiel dark friends. That's just how being ta'veren works. You draw in all these significant people towards you. Melindra wanted Matt to step out of Rand's shadow and gain his own glory, and by the end we see that he does. We see the creation of the Band of the Red Hand. It was mentioned in book 1, Min saw a bloody hand when she looked at Rand's aura initially. I don't know if that's what it was signifying, but maybe it was. I loved watching Matt take the leadership role at Korean, and the chapter where he uses his memories of past battles to figure out the battle plan the Isle are going to use in like minutes, when it took the clan chiefs far longer. I thought that chapter was awesome. Then we get to see him put those memories to even more use later on. We see him use them during all his skirmishes with men at Korean, and then even after the battle, we see that the Band of the Red Hand are winning against the Andorrans across the Alguenya by impressive margins. I wasn't crazy about Couladin and Matt happening off screen, but it's like I said earlier, you kind of had to take the Battle of Korean for what it was. It was more about Matt and Rand's internal struggles. Don't really have much more to say about Matt. I was thinking about stuff from The Shadow Rising. He didn't really have much page time in this for me to go over more. I was thinking a bit more about the Daughter of the Nine Moons and who she might be and how they might come to meet. So by this point in the story, it is a pretty safe bet that Matt is Eamon reincarnated. So I'm thinking that the Daughter of the Nine Moons is Eldrin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I think the Daughter of the Nine Moons is Eldrin, Eamon's wife, reincarnated, because Brigitte had this bit in this book where she was talking about how she and Gaedal Kane are fated to always come back together when they're both reborn, both what's the verb? Thrown out by the pattern back into time, whatever that is. So those two are always destined to meet, so I feel like Eamon and Eldrin must be. So if the Daughter of the Nine Moons is Eldrin reincarnated, then surely she must be able to channel. And if she is a Seanchan princess or the queen, empress herself, then that will be very much taboo because the Seanchan are very anti-channeler. So I'm thinking maybe a bit of conflict arrives surrounding that, and that is how maybe Matt meets the Daughter of the Nine Moons if he's not, captured and they meet up like how I said last book or last review. So now we have all three boys in positions of leadership and their interests aren't aligned, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how that all pans out. Berylane was mentioned to be approaching Cairhien at some point. I guess that's going to end up with her going to the Two Rivers instead, get a bit more of that Hawk versus Falcon action. Perrin and the Schnauzer, they're not in this book, didn't really mind much. As I mentioned at the start of this review, the rest of the Emond Fielders needed to catch up to Rand and Perrin, so I guess we just needed to press pause on Perrin, so to speak, until they all caught up. We still do get some glimpses of him though, like we see he's building his manor in Emond's Field, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how things happen moving forward with him and Davram Bashir, because we saw him turn up in Caemlyn at the end of this book, and I think I know how Matt is so lucky now. He took all the luck from Perrin, because Perrin has to be the unluckiest man alive. He is meeting the father-in-law first. So guys, next up to talk about is the women, so I'm just going to cut it off there. This video is long enough for part 1. Thank you guys for watching. Part 2 will be up, I don't know, next Tuesday maybe. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.